Hi everyone, I'm Andrea Klim. Thanks for tuning in to Turn to the Stars. And I'm recording the planetary influences, some of the most important and historical configurations between the planets that are happening between March 7th and March 17th. And I'm just going to do an overview of some of these bullet points that I'm going to be talking about today. The first one being the Jupiter, Neptune, Sun conjunction this week. The second being the Venus in Aquarius and Mars in Aquarius conjunction that began on, I believe that was on, let's see, it actually happens tomorrow, Sunday, March 6th. And so I'm going to be talking about that and how the energies of these planets with each other being conjoined, how they tell us a story about connecting with other people and how we assert ourselves. And it brings a huge amount of attention to the Aquarius signs as they're being integrated. Also going to be talking about the Saturn square, the North Node in Taurus and the South Node in Scorpio that begins on April 11th. By the end of this week, around the 16th and the 17th, we're starting to see this energy grow very, very strong. So I'm going to talk about some of the deeper meanings of these planetary connections and the story that they tell and some historical events that are attached to some of these conjunctions that are happening between the planets. But before I begin, I want to do a little recap of today, Saturday, March 5th, and Sunday, March 6th. And I had spoke about on my recording last week that Mercury was going to square the North Node in Taurus and the South Node in Scorpio. And Mercury is in Aquarius, and it's actually very close to just having separated with Saturn in Aquarius, but it is forming a fixed square to the North Node and the South Node. And the North Node in Taurus tells us that the best direction for us to be focused on for the next year and a half is, and that actually began back in December, is to focus on our resources, our finances, our money, our materials, our earth, and agricultural needs. However, communication is going to be a challenging thing. The news, what's in the news is going to be very challenging. And discussions about our financial future are going to be under the microscope. And that became very strong within 1 degree today of squaring the North Node and the South Node. So it's kind of like we're stuck, or we're trying to adjust to let go of some old ways of doing things, especially in areas such as the stock market, areas of our investments, areas of insurance, in areas where we are on the cusp of identifying what we don't want to bring forward into the future. And again, this is energy that's affecting us all here on Earth. It's basically all of us together and what the overall planetary stories are that they're carrying to us this week. So I wanted to just say that today gasoline at the gas pump jumped 30 cents from yesterday to today. And that's some of our economical resources. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the war that started between Russia and the Ukraine and what's happening there. So people are scared about their portfolios. People are scared about what the future is. And also in our minds, we're having to accept what's happening. We have no choice but to walk through it. That's what a fixed T-square indicates, especially with the nodes. So I'm going to talk more about this at the end of this recording. As like I said, at the end of this week, we have the beginning, applying energy of Saturn squaring the nodes. And Saturn is about our responsibilities. It is about limitation. It can be about fear. It can be about hard work. In Aquarius, it says our work is in sticking together and to realize our common goals. Who are our allies? Who are not our allies? So I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the week ahead. I'm going to start with Monday, March 7th. We have we can see that Jupiter and the Sun is together and it's headed toward Neptune and Pisces. That's becoming very strong as the week moves forward. I'm going to talk in depth about the meaning of that. I'm going to talk in depth about the Mars-Venus conjunction in Aquarius also, and the beginning square of Saturn to the North Node and the South Node. And I'm going to also point out some historical events from the past around these particular conjunctions. So let's first start out talking about the Sun, Neptune, and Jupiter conjunction that's going to grow stronger and stronger throughout the week. Let's see when it becomes exact. The Sun is almost exact on Friday, March 11th with Neptune. And Neptune and Jupiter and the Sun are all going to be together this week. So I'm going to talk about some, because also this configuration is growing in its strength as we move into next week. So that's the first thing I'm going to start to go into depth on. And the first thing I want to talk about is that Neptune was discovered in 1846, and this combination of Neptune and Jupiter is lasting from March till May of this year, and it's going to be exact on April 12th. And so I'm going to go into some of the deeper meaning behind that right now. Although unions between Jupiter and Neptune open up our awareness beyond the usual limits of material reality, their cycle in mundane astrology is one of the most orderly and consistent, and Jupiter and Neptune cycle stands out from all others as it occurs in a successive order of zodiac signs, typically moving from one sign to the next with an occasional repeat of a sign. For example, the 1958 conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune was in Scorpio. The 1971 conjunction was in Sagittarius. The 1984 conjunction was in the beginning of Capricorn. The 1997 conjunction was at the end of Capricorn, and the 2009 conjunction was in Aquarius. So it takes Jupiter and Neptune about 166 years to move through their entire cycle, and conjunctions with each other often every 13 years or so. So due to the inconsistent movement from one sign to the next, astrologer Dane Rudger stated that the cycle between Jupiter and Neptune is one of the most important to pay attention to for historical purposes, in addition to the eclipse cycle and the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. And as I said before, Neptune was discovered in 1846 when it was occupying the sign of Aquarius, with Jupiter forming a trine from Gemini. As a result, the first conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune to occur following the discovery of Neptune was their union on March 17th of 1856 at 19 degrees of Pisces. So this means that the conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune on April 12th, 2022 will demarcate the first time that humanity has experienced the full cycle of Jupiter and Neptune forming conjunctions in every sign of the zodiac sequentially since becoming aware of the existence of Neptune. Their union in Pisces will be especially powerful due to Jupiter being at full strength as the ruler of Pisces, making it the first conjunction between Neptune and Jupiter in its domicile due to Jupiter being at full strength as the ruler of Pisces, making it the first conjunction between Neptune and Pluto. And actually, since the 1971 conjoining or conjunction, we've experienced 3 conjunctions in a row between Jupiter and Neptune in signs ruled by Saturn, further indicating that their merging in Pisces may bring about leaps in thought and potent renewal of jovial hope and vision. So here is some further history with Jupiter and Neptune. The French astrologer André Barbeau had a reputation of being one of the most esteemed mundane astrologers of the past century, and so it is notable to consider the unifying and humanitarian quality he attributed to the cycles between Jupiter and Neptune. Barbeau wrote that conjunctions between Jupiter and Neptune emphasize unified collective global power and a collective liberal order with collective movements that have liberal democratic tendencies favoring universal moral values. For example, women finally gained the right to vote in the United States of America through the 19th Amendment being ratified less than a month before the Jupiter and Neptune conjunction in Leo in 1919. Moreover, both the First and the Second World Wars ended during periods of conjunctions between Jupiter and Neptune, with the League of Nations being formed following their conjunction in 1919, and the United Nations being formed following their conjunctions in Libra in 1945. So it's really remarkable that both attempts during the 20th century to form governing bodies that brought world powers together on behalf of avoiding another world war occurred in exact alignment with Jupiter and Neptune. In fact, the ubiquitous peace symbol commonly used today was invented in 1958 with Jupiter and Neptune within a few degrees of one another in Scorpio. Some of the other things that Barbeau stated was that the unions of Jupiter and Neptune tend to bring a swing to the left with democratic, socialist, or even more or less revolutionary tendencies. There can be tension between the more revolutionary manifestations of Jupiter and Neptune with efforts by global powers to expand their influence and power. So, for example, while the League of Nations mandated the territories of Palestine and modern Iraq to the United Kingdom and Syria to France during the period of the 1919 conjunction, the Cuban Revolution achieved victory following the conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune in 1958, and the Zapatista Army of National Liberation was founded in 1983 with Jupiter and Neptune within 15 degrees of one another in Sagittarius. So across the world, there has often been an upsurge in strikes and protests on behalf of the labor movement and workers' rights when Jupiter and Neptune come together. For another example of this is the Coxey's Army March of the unemployed workers to Washington, D.C. during the time of Jupiter and Neptune conjunct in Gemini in 1894, was truly the most significant protest march in history upon the capital of the United States of America. And in 2009, Jupiter and Neptune, this was a cycle at this time, and it concerned the most recent cycle of Jupiter and Neptune that began in 2009 in Aquarius. Within the United States of America, there was not only the inauguration of the President Barack Obama, the first African American president in the nation's history, there was also the landmark Affordable Care Act signed into law by President Obama that dramatically expanded health care coverage to the U.S. populace. The ability of President Obama to lead Congress in the passage of liberal legislation had a parallel to the election of Franklin Roosevelt to the presidency during a previous conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune in 1932. Roosevelt became president during the initial stages of the Great Depression, and was able to have his New Deal legislation passed to address the economic depression gripping the nation, bringing hope and increased opportunity to many during a very bleak period in history. Similarly, the recent election of President Joe Biden suggests that as a new cycle between Jupiter and Neptune begins, President Biden will continue to push for legislation addressing the economic crisis emanating from the COVID-19 pandemic. So in April of this year, 2022, we have another conjunction, as I was talking about earlier. So it's really important to place this April 2022 conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces within the context of recent and current astrological alignments. Most importantly, the union between Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces follows the new cycles initiated between Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn in 2020 that correlated with the onset of a global pandemic. It's also called a Great Reset. The conjunction or the conjoining between Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius at the end of 2022, which was that major astronomical event and astrological event, and Uranus and Taurus, those aspects established a new era of Jupiter-Saturn uniting in the air triplicity, and the waning square between Saturn and Aquarius and Uranus and Taurus will coincide with rapid innovations and sudden collapses across society, both from 2021 and 2022. It's really notable that the meaning of the Jupiter and Neptune cycle is diametrically opposed to the meaning of Saturn and Pluto cycle that shaped 2020. The astrologer and historian Richard Tarnas in Cosmos and Psyche described Saturn and Pluto as aligning with conservative empowerment in eras of international crisis and conflict, empowerment of reactionary forces and totalitarian impulses, organized violence and oppression. So the inspiring vision of Jupiter and Neptune can provide a counterbalance to the difficult despair brought by Saturn and Pluto, helping to nurture new dreams and ways of recovering from the setbacks and resets brought about by the pandemic. So the union of Jupiter in Pisces and Neptune in Pisces does stimulate and galvanize new trends and imaginative forms of creative expression across diverse disciplines across the world. So the last time that Jupiter and Neptune formed a conjunction in Pisces, the fashion and textile industries were revolutionized by the accidental discovery of the first synthetic organic dye by William Henry Perkin, who was trying to synthesize quinine for the treatment of malaria, and only 18 years old when he discovered aniline purple known today as Mavane, Perkin was primed for the impact of Jupiter and Neptune as he was born with a stellium of Mercury, Uranus, Venus, Mars, and Sun, all in Pisces, very powerful. And before Perkin's discovery, the only materials available for textile coloration came from planets or animals and involved long, laborious processes to extract color. So significantly, the brilliant purple hue revealed by Perkin has previously only been accessible to the wealthy. There was even initial thought to name the dye Tyrian purple after the legendary coloring created from sea snails that became a sign of eminence in ancient culture. And so after the discovery of Mavine, there was this huge immense wave of clothing and textiles dyed purple as the color became widely accessible for the first time in human history. And Pisces, Neptune is the planet that helps bring resolve and takes us deep into emotions and feelings. And Jupiter is about our belief along with Neptune. So if we believe that our dreams are going to come true, if we believe that this is a time of a deep dive into the imaginatory world, and the psychic worlds and the psychic realms, and that we're becoming even more sensitive at this time. This is a great marker of that. And also, Jupiter and Neptune both have the potential to bring healing as well as massive escape from reality. And we're seeing that amongst a lot of people of the earth. It just seems so difficult to be on the earth at times that we look for ways to escape. So that's something to be very, very careful of. So there was a book written, it was called The Red Book by Carl Jung, during the period of the Neptune and Jupiter conjunction in Aquarius in 2009. And it was a testament to the meaning that can eventually be extracted from disorienting, disillusioning, and disintegrative experience of Neptune. The long-awaited publication of Jung's personal Odyssey has revolutionized not only the understanding of Jung's work during the past cycle of Jupiter and Neptune, it also expanded the potential meaning for all of us so that we can gain through encounters with the mystery of unconscious forces. The field of depth in psychology has important links with the Jupiter and Neptune cycle, as the famous meeting between Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud took place during the period of Jupiter and Neptune conjunct in Cancer in 1907. So Sigmund Freud was born with both Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces. So for him, it was a vision to come together in these areas of mystery and the unconscious forces. So this is very significant, and we're coming upon this conjunction. It's getting really strong as March proceeds, and by the time of April 11th, or at April 12th, when this is exact. So these are some of the things that we need to be aware of. And as I said throughout this week, this is very powerful. And so Monday, on March 7th, we do have the moon in Taurus, right beside Uranus. So this is emotional epiphanies, awakenings, emotional, unusual events, things blowing up. That's Uranus's territory. Lightning bolt experiences, rebellion. And the moon in Taurus is very set, very stable. Uranus is breaking apart our awareness of these old earthly, agricultural, monetary experiences that we're having. And so On Monday, the moon is in Taurus, and it is actually going to conjoin the North Node in Taurus. So we have a highlight of material and money and our material resources that is being put under the microscope, and there's an acceptance that's growing really strong of talks about these areas, and a lot of news about the different parts of the world where there's lots of restrictions that are beginning to show up, especially with that Saturn and applying square to the North Node. So on Tuesday, we can see that we've got some very powerful squares forming, as I talked about earlier, with Saturn and its applying approach, meaning the energy is becoming stronger and stronger as the days progress of this Saturn square, the North Node and the South Node of the Moon. And the Moon actually on Tuesday is going to remind us, the influence of Taurus are going to remind us of how important it is for us to remain connected, remain together, while this in those areas of concentration on the value of the materials that we have and how lucky we are. And because the North Node brings the answers, where the South Node shows us where we've been and what that looked like in the past and what we're meant to shed our skin from. So we're in the process of an incredible growth on this earth at this time. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the nodes, the lunar nodes, and some important planetary configurations that are happening throughout this year. So the lunar nodes in Taurus and Scorpio. So Jupiter squared the nodes on January 3rd, and it was a moment of spiritual decision making. Pluto trined the North Node exactly and was sextile the South Node on February 14th, which was Valentine's Day. And there was the tendency to sleepwalk through soft aspects like these and facilitate power moves with little resistance, but also a sense of empowerment. The next the next really important configuration with the North Node and the South Node, the Neptune was sextile the North Node and trining the South Node on that'll be happening on March 29th. This moment could again find us fast asleep. This is an opportunity for a spiritual or mystical experience. And the Sun is going to actually square the nodes. It already did on February 15th, and it will again on August 10th. These dates always arrive about twice a year. They mark the halfway points between the eclipses. They express and they represent key pivotal points where important decisions can be made. So we choose the path or the trodden path, or do we choose something new and pull up the resources that are attached to being brave? The August 10th square is especially groundbreaking. And then we have Saturn squaring the North Node and the South Node, as I said, about 11th and 12th of April. And this is going to be a very rare decision moment for our social structures and civil society. Will we decide to reinforce the old and destructive social divisions, or move forward towards something more wholesome and inclusive? I'll talk more about this as we get into April, because Mercury is going to show us some unfamiliar but inspiring paths for growth and innovation with the North Node, Mars conjunct the North Node. And So there's going to be new paths, inspirational paths for growth and innovation. On November 6th, close to the total lunar eclipse of November 8th, we'll get a glimpse of destructive patterns we need to change. So Uranus is a marker too of earthquakes and shock and explosion. So, as the Uranus gets closer to the North Nodes, we're going to see these type of experiences unfold. So I'm going to come back now, and I was describing this in depth as the moon moves into Gemini, March 9th, we are going to have the moon squaring Jupiter. The moon is in Gemini, which is a sign that has dual tendencies, which does bring a concentration on the news. And when it squares the Sun and Jupiter and Neptune, it means that it's going to be hard to stay focused on what our dreams are because there's a lot of worry, a lot of concern, a lot of anxiety that comes through that mutable square to Jupiter, the Sun, and Neptune. So that's an area to be concerned about on Wednesday. And what grows especially strong is the moon is still in Gemini on March 10th, which is Thursday, and Jupiter, the Sun, and Neptune are squaring the moon. So it's going to be a day of difficult news, a day of challenges to stay centered, to stay focused, to stay balanced, to stay in the moment as the news delivers unsavory news that is hard to figure out how to resolve or dissolve. It really puts some stress on our faith. It puts some stress on our beliefs. So that is especially important on Thursday. It peaks in energy on Thursday. And on March 11th, Friday, the moon moves into Cancer. And the moon in Cancer is especially concerned with our security, on taking care of each other, our families, the security of our homeland, and that's going to square Chiron on the 11th and the 12th. So Chiron is the wounded healer, so it helps us to work and put more energy into finding the healing qualities that are so important at this time for us each individually and with our families. So there's a lot of focus on that. And as I said, close to the end of the week, the Saturn square, the North Node and the South Node begins to become very strong. And there can be a lot of disruption or conflict that we're going to be very focused on with that Mars and Venus and Aquarius being together. So lots of conflict that we're trying to resolve. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Venus-Mars conjunction and how this plays out. Depends on how we relate to Venus and Mars in our own chart. At best, it's great for creativity and for balancing the feminine and the masculine sides of ourselves. Venus speaks about the feminine, the yin or the passive side of attraction, and represents what we value. Mars is the masculine or the yang or the active side of repulsion or separation and represents how we assert ourselves to get what we want or value. Liz Green said in the book, The Inner Planets, the combination of Venus and Mars in the horoscope increases the drive toward pleasure and self-satisfaction. These people that are born with Venus and Mars together, know how to get what they want and will charm your socks off to do it. And she goes on to say, if you think about the fact that with any Venus-Mars aspect, one's personal values combined with one's aggressive instincts, and we will realize that this delightful charm masks the proverbial iron fist in the velvet glove. So it's a very potent combination, but it can manifest to contradictory ways. I'd say that in relating to each other and being assertive, that Mars in Aquarius always wants to take action for the whole, and it can also be very active in rebellion in Aquarius, because Aquarius is ruled by the planet Uranus. So there's this disruption or change that's happening that we see very evident with Mars and Aquarius, and people coming together and beginning to relate on levels that are concerned with technology, with our internet, the interweb, the ways that we communicate online. So it could be very possible when Saturn squares the nodes that there is some type of cyber attack. And when Mars and Venus square the North Node and the South Node, that can be a strong indication that we're going to have to really pull together in our communities, in our friendships, in our goals, to help each other to resolve some of these difficult combinations. So it's a very potent combination, as I said earlier. Venus can also emasculate Mars, just like in the famous painting, and then Mars sits and sees in the basement. So there was a painting that was done of, mythology with Aphrodite, the goddess of love, fertility, and beauty. And she's notorious for causing, in this painting, it gives a picture of how notorious she is for causing problems in love and or war. In fact, Aphrodite Venus is as much of a troublemaker as Aries Mars, and few can resist her charms. So Aries is no exception. And the painting that I'm talking about has quite a few, and many people, which shows Mars sleeping or relaxed without his sword and definitely in no mood to fight. And this painting is done by Botticelli, shows Mars completely zonked, surrounded by satyrs, playing with his helmet and lance while Venus looks on. So those can be some of the outer experiences that we have with Mars and Venus together. So Mars and Venus on March 6th, these two planets entered Aquarius, which is tomorrow. And there's an author, Lisa Stardust. She's the author of Saturn, Return, Survival Guide, and the Astrology deck. And she says these two will form a conjunction on that day which lead to major decisions when it comes to love. And so Yanovich also echoes the same sentiment, noting that it will be the second time this year that these two planets join. The atmosphere of love and passion will be high for a few days before and after. She says it's going to be a good time to take action in romance, to start a new relationship, or to bring the existing relationships we have to the next level. And another date that we should write down on our calendars is March 22nd, when Mars in Aquarius squares Uranus and Taurus. And I talked about that a little bit before. And so this transit is known for sexual encounters, since Mars and Uranus could bring in an unexpected lover or mind-blowing experience. And that was something that Liz Simmons says in the daily career horoscope. And she also said that it can be it can be a little sexually risque, so we may feel driven to do something way out of our comfort zone. Simmons also advises us to keep our boundaries intact during this square. Feel free to deviate from our unusual favorite pose, for instance, but be aware that the heat of the moment may be so hot that we might even consider doing something like foregoes our protection and know when to pull back. So this is very powerful. We should also keep an eye out for April 5th, when Mars conjuncts Saturn, the planet of structure and karma, because for a few days before and after that date, that's April 5th, you might feel like you're not moving forward as fast as you'd like. You may feel as if something is holding you back. So we should use this time to take a break, to recharge, and know that there's enough time to complete what we've set off to do. And we should give ourselves a rest, and because that is definitely a must. But take extra care on April 5th, this day, to not overexert your energy. So if some things to remember about Aquarius is that it's all about collective energy, and that when it pairs with actionable Mars and meaningful change, there is meaningful change that's going to happen. Aquarius is the humanitarian side of the zodiac and makes issues impossible to ignore when it has two planets, such as Mars and Venus in Aquarius. And so there can be an issue that has been bothering us that we take time to read up on. We should follow people who are leaders in that area in our community. So this can also be a time that we feel overwhelmed and that we're thinking about significant challenges, or feel like one person can't make a difference. But when we do it all together, we create a tidal wave of change. And we should remember that this is an especially powerful opportunity for revolution during this transit. So we should take it and run with it. So that pretty much is some pretty deep information about these aspects that are coming up. And one really beautiful aspect next Sunday is that Jupiter, Neptune, and the Sun are going to trine the Moon. So there is this beautiful sensitivity and focus on our feelings, our emotions, our families. Cancer is the caregiver of the zodiac, and and Jupiter and the Sun are shining light on this beautiful, deep area of our psyches. And visions are likely to come through very easy on this day, Sunday, March 13th. So everyone, I wanted to just cover some of those very deep areas in today's broadcast. And while you're listening to this, if you want to write down some of these dates on your calendar and what to expect and what might be the most prominent influences at those times. And again, remind everybody about the birthday 20% off coupon I have for all Pisces that is in motion on my website under birthday coupons. So if you're a Pisces, this is a very, very powerful month for you. And to look at how Jupiter in Pisces and how Neptune in Pisces is going to influence you this over the course of till about March 18th. when the new moon comes in Aries. So we have this growing relationship that helps us to go very, very deep into areas of our faith and our beliefs and our spirit. So, everyone, thanks for tuning in to Turn to the Stars. I look forward to seeing you next Saturday when I record the astrology for the next week ahead. So, remember, turn to the stars. You'll find your answers there. Take good care. I'll see you next time.